Now we'll continue with the units. Units we have already seen in one of the previous slides, but let us try to learn these concepts in detail, because this is something that will be really required when you're going to work on responsive designs or adaptive designs. So use of units is really required when your page will be viewed on different devices, or it will be displayed on a certain set of device only. For example, you could be working on certain websites wherein you will be targeting only desktop users, or there could be instances where you will be targeting only mobile users. In those cases, you might make use of absolute length units, but in case you do not know where exactly your website will be seen, as in you're not sure on which different set of devices your website will be accessed by the users, in those cases you can use relative length units. So which is the modern age requirement that most of the users are gradually increasing their consumption on mobile devices. So it's quite evident that those users will be viewing your websites on their mobile devices. There could be some examples wherein you can use absolute length units, that is in case you have a standalone application or admin pages wherein you are required to display a lot of information. In those certain cases, obviously it makes sense to use target only desktop screens or the larger screens. So in those specific cases you might use absolute length units. So let us see relative length units first, which is fairly common these days. So relative length units basically specifies the length relative to another length property. So for this, it basically depends on some other element or the root element of the document, or the view width or height of the device. With the use of relative length units, your web page or the design of the web page scales better on different rendering mediums as well. And the units that are commonly used: em, ex, centimeter, rem. VW is basically view width, VH is view height, then view min, view max, and then percentage. So few of this we have already seen, but let us touch this point again. So we'll start with the EX. So EX units equals to X height of the current font. So if this is your font, so whatever the height of letter X, okay, of the lowercase x, that will be considered as the X height. So if in your font set X is not present, in that case font size is set to default. So this is one example. What you can do is, once you know that X has a certain height for the font, then you can specify it like this. So if let's say your EX value is 10 pixels, so we are setting font size as 1.8 multiple times, so that will become 1.8 multiplication, it will give you 18 pixels. Okay, so fairly larger font. If you write multiple as 0.5 EX, then the answer would be 5px. Okay, because we are assuming that default size is 10 pixels, so half of it is 5 pixels. So this will be the output of this particular CSS code. Then we have relative length unit, EM. So we know that by default browsers, at least the Chrome browser, has 16px as the default font size. But in case your font size is set to, let's say, 18 pixels, okay, and let's say line height is set to 1.8 em, then the total line height in pixel is 1.8, which is em, multiplied by the font size. So it gives you the font size as 32.4 px. So again 1.8 becomes the multiplier over here, and the default value is taken from the text from the parents element. So here is one example. You can see that I have written 1.8 em over here. Okay, it's almost similar to the previous example, and this is how the output will be. Now this value will be dependent on the parent element, so that is the reason there is a slight difference between this output and the previous output. Then next we will see the other relative length units. So ch is nothing but the relative to the width of character 0, and rem, which is very commonly used, which basically relative to the font size of the root element. So this is slightly different than em, okay, but em and rem is something that is very commonly used. So only difference between both of these two units is that rem works with relative to the font size of your root element, whereas em works in relationship with the parent element's text size. Then we have vw, that is view width. So it takes relative value to 1% of the width of your viewport. So if this is your viewport, so viewport is nothing but the visible size of your screen. So let us say if this is 1024 and height is 768, so VW will take 1% of the width. Okay, so in this case it will take 10.24. Similarly, VH is relative to 1% of height of viewport. So in this particular case, it will take 7.68 as a default value. And similar to this, vmin and vmax. So vmin is relative to 1% of viewport's smaller dimension. So we have 1024 and 768. So it will take whichever is the minimum value. So in this case 768 is the minimum, so this will be the default value for vmin. And in case of vmax, so between these two values, whichever is the maximum will be taken. So in this case this is the maximum, so this will be used as a default value. And to all these relative units you will be required to add a multiplier. Okay, so let us say for v minimum this value is selected. So whenever I write, let's say 2v min, so in case of above example we have v min as 768. Okay, so this will be used with our multiplier. So wherever I am going to specify this as the value, output of this will be applied. And finally we have percentage. So percentage is very simple. It is relative to the parent element. So if your parent element has, let's say 20 pixel as the size, then if you write, let's say 50%, okay, so 50% of this, that is 10 pixel, will be the value that will be set to your property. So these are few examples, and this is how we write the values. So these are the units that we are specifying, and these all are the multipliers. So this output is relative to what overall is written in your code. It is not completely dependent on these values. It will be dependent on what parent it holds, what is the value specified in your root element. So on your screen it could vary, as in these results might not be seen as it is. To get this rendered, we have set few values on the parent element or at the root level element, and we have also written the HTML code for the same. But this is something that you can definitely practice, and we are also going to see examples on this in the coding session. For now, let us continue with the absolute length units. So these are fixed and appear as specified. So whenever I say, let's say 20 pixel as the value to a property, then it will be fixed to it exactly as like this, and it will be displayed with the same size across all the devices. So it doesn't matter whether you are going to view this particular type of content on a mobile device or desktop device. On all devices it will be displayed in the same font. So as I mentioned earlier, it is used when output medium is known, as in when you know that end user is going to view this website on a desktop device only or on a mobile device only. In those cases you can you make use of absolute length units. So inches, centimeters, mm, which are fairly used in the print media or the digital content. This doesn't mean the website, but images, or in case you are planning to print something, in those cases ideally you'll use this particular notation. Okay, and other uses in case you're planning to display pages on high resolution devices only. In those cases, you can definitely make use of these particular units. You can also use this in case you want to specify certain formatting on the print formats. Okay, so for example, you could be working on a banking application and your user is expected to print the banking statement. In that case, maybe you can write CSS where you can specify these units. And these are another common set of units which are really common. So px is the most common, that is something used, and these are used for desktop versions. Okay, and in case of lower resolution devices too. So use of all the units is quite selective. This really depends on what requirement you have, and with practice you'll get to know what units ideally you should be using. So there is no technically a correct answer, but this is something that developer has to choose as a unit selectively, and this will come with practice. So again, here are a few examples. So we have this marked in purple are the units specified, and the values in orange are all the multipliers. This is something that will you might see exact as it is on your web page, unless you don't have any other code on the web page. This will be displayed in the correct format. The reason is we have used absolute length units over here. Then we will talk about the displays, or how exactly the HTML elements are displayed. So there is a default property that is applied to all the HTML elements. So using or setting the display property, you control the box type generated by the element. What this statement means is, when we have a small tag, okay, it will have this relative box like this. Okay, but when we use a div, okay, it could be using a complete width of the page. Okay, so this is a block level element. Okay, and however this is one inline element. So when you have a subsequent HTML element written after code of this particular small tag, the next element will be displayed next to it. So that is why we call it as inline. Okay, but when we add a box element in the DOM, or the document object model, so it consumes the complete space available to it. So it could be contained by the page width or another container. Okay, so when I say container, so this could be a container. Okay, and then you can have another element aligned over here like this. Okay, but this could be a block level, this could another be a block level element. So in those cases you need to specify certain code, so you can make these elements inline like this. Of course, display property cannot work independently, but let us continue and you'll get an idea how this can be achieved. As discussed earlier, every element has a default display value. Like the small tag has inline as a default value, div has a block as the default value. So but you can change those behavior with the help of display property. So we'll quickly talk about the property values that display property holds. So display block forces element to have a block level element, okay, like div and p tag. So this is how you can write the syntax, and we know that span and a tag are the inline elements. Okay, so they don't utilize the complete space, but there could be requirements wherein you are required to display these elements into block style. So you can write display : block. Then we have display inline, which forces element to behave like inline level element, like a span and a tag. So here we have one p tag where we have specified display property and the value is inline. So whatever the element comes after this p tag will be displayed inline. Then we have inline block, which forces element to generate block box with content in the same line. So this is a typical case wherein you require the block element to be displayed inline. So earlier example where I mentioned that you require, let's say, two boxes to be displayed inline. In those cases you can write display inline block. Okay, and obviously you will specify some width to these elements so that those can be displayed inline block. And finally, another most important display property, that is display none. It simply hides the element and its child elements. So when you apply display none to this particular element, okay, whatever is inside this element, that and the element itself will be completely hidden from the web page. So this is typically required when you on click of button you hide something on the page. In those cases you just set property display to none to that particular HTML element. So typical behavior could be you have a pop-up and it is closed automatically after, let's say, 10 seconds, or you have a close button on that pop-up and when you click on the close button the pop-up vanishes. So this is something that can be used with the help of display none. Okay, so this is, let's say, one div and you can write display none. So this particular div will be hidden along with its all the child elements. And then we have display contents. The contents as a value to display property. This makes container disappear, which makes children elements of the element next level up in the DOM element. So what it basically does is it just hides the parent only. Okay, could be rare chances wherein this property can be used, but it's good that you should know that it's available. And then we have display flex. It displays elements as a block level flex container. So I'll explain you flex in the live coding session. And similar to this, we have display grid, which displays element as the block level grid container. So I think we'll for the flex and grid we'll take two examples. Similarly for inline flex we'll also take one example which displays element as inline level flex container. So these are fairly two different new concepts we'll see in the live coding session. Another one to see is the inline grid. So this is quite useful in case you want to form a grid and you have a container, and inside that container you have multiple child elements, and those child elements will become grid items. Inline table basically displays element as inline level table. So this can be useful when you have some tabular information, but unfortunately you have the data written inside the span tag. In those cases you might use this particular property. We'll take an example of all the properties that we've seen so far. Similarly, we have a list item wherein the element may behave like a li element. So you just need to specify this property and it will start behaving like the list items. Then we have display run in, wherein it displays element as block or inline, and that decision is basically taken based on the context. Okay. Then we have display table, where it lets the element behave like table element. We have then table caption, where it lets element behave like a caption element. So similarly we have a table column group, then table header group, also table in the slides like this. Okay, again rare instances where you can use this, but something again that we should know. Then the display table cell, it will start behaving like a TD element. Then we have table call, so it will with the help of this it will start behaving like the call element. Then table row, it will help us to have element behave like a TR element. And in case you're working on these multiple values and there could be stages of the label as the initial. In that case you can write display initial, so whatever the default value was there, it will be automatically set. So that was all for the display properties. I think we have explained a lot of values and about the units over here. So let us try to take examples on all this so you clearly understand these properties and values. So in the next video we are going to learn about units and display. So previously, as seen in the slides, we'll take few examples. In the examples folders we have units display.css and HTML file as well. So I have kept this file open over here. I have also kept the web page open over here. So this is something that output will be rendered with the help of this HTML file and CSS file. So just before that, let me just create one more file. Okay, let me just save this file first. Okay, I'm going to save this in the same folder. I'm going to call this file as small example.html. okay, and then I'm going to write the HTML code for it. So let's say I'm writing example of fonts, and then here I'm writing one div tag, and inside this div, let's say I'm writing kodegod.com, and then I have, let's say, one p tag. Okay, and inside this as well I'm writing kodegod.com, and then let's say I'm writing few style parameters over here. Okay, similarly for this style as well. So what I want to explain over here is how this relative and absolute fonts are going to work. Okay, so let me save this file. Okay, and let me open this file from this particular location. Okay, so we have this code. So now let us try to change a few parameters over here. So let's say I'm writing font size as 16 pixel. Okay, so when I refresh, there is no change because the default font size is 16 pixels in this case. So let me just increase this a little, let's say 30 pixels. So it is getting applied on both the parameters. Okay, so you can notice that even the second kodegod.com is displayed with the same size. So when I write the font size here, let's say 20 pixels, okay, then you can notice the difference over here. Okay, now to have these font sizes work relative to the parent, what we can do is we can make use of em parameter. Okay, and let's say I'm writing 1. Okay, so we know that it will be same because I'm writing just multiplier as 1 for 30 pixel. Okay, so when I write, let's say 1.5, so you can notice that the font size has got increased. So this was about the em tag. This is how it will work in relationship with the font size of the parent. So if I change it to 40 instead of 30, and when I hit refresh, you can notice both the fonts have got changed. Similarly, we have rem. Okay, but when I refresh over here, so you can notice that the second font has got significantly reduced. The reason is it is now going to refer the size of the root element. So in this case it is going to be 16px. So it is displaying me font size in 16 pixels. To confirm this, what I can do is I can write one rem. Okay, and then just copy this code and paste it outside of this div. Okay, so this font and this font should be identical. Yeah, so the last one has got font size as 16 pixel, that is the default font size, and because we have specified one rem, so that is also 16 pixel. But when I write 1.5 rem, it will increase its font size. We know that rem is basically linked to the root element, so that is why the difference is here. In case of absolute, we can write 50 pixel or percent, something like that. Okay, so if I write 40% and I hit refresh, so it is going to take 40% of the default font size. When I say 200% and I hit refresh, so this will be font size 32. So that is 200% of the original font size. So 16 plus 16, it will display as 32 pixels. Similarly, we can have vmax over here. So we know that it will be in relative to your view size. So whatever is the maximum size in this case, that will be considered. But you notice that when I resize, it is also going to change the font size. So in a way, this font size becomes responsive. So in modern day designs, it makes sense to have your font size in relative mode. Okay. So coming back to our example, we have taken couple of examples over here. So in the HTML file, we have this relative class, and inside this we have specified multiple examples. Okay, and I suggest you to have a look around these examples. These are very easy to understand. So these are the HTML codes for all these tags, and then here we have the relative values for all the HTML elements. So coming back to this example again, when we try to resize this, you can notice that there's a significant difference wherever we have this relative size unit specified. So I think we can easily skip this part because this is very easy to understand. So in terms of absolute, we have specified values in inches, centimeter, mm, pt, pc and px. So here is the HTML code where these styles will be applied, and these are static in nature. So you can notice that there is no change wherein I'm going to resize the browser. There won't be any change. These are fixed. These are not changing at all. And in terms of relative, you can notice some difference when I'm changing the width or the height of the element. You can notice that there is some difference like this. So now we'll talk about the other properties that we have seen. The properties such as display. So this HTML is basically to signify how we can use display inline and display block. So all the block level elements or the block type of elements can be converted into inline and vice versa. So you can notice that though this span tag over here, okay, which is rendered by this particular code, is basically inline, but we have turned it into a display block as well, and you can see that as a block it is displaying over here. So we have specified height and width there, and that is how it is displaying it as block. But when it is displayed as inline, you can notice that height and width does not have any significance over there. So it is just going to consume whatever the text size is there, but of course it is going to consider the padding, because padding is something that will be applied around the text. So in case you want to have a certain width and height, in that case ideally you should use inline block or block. So only difference between inline and inline block is that the block will be part of your line. Okay, so this is coming in line with the line. Okay, the element is basically in line, and because we are specifying inline, so this particular property will be as block, but it will be displayed inline. In case you just write block, in that case it won't be inline. So when I hit refresh, you can notice that it has broken the line and it is not falling in line. So let me just reverse these changes. Then we have display none, which basically just hides element. So in the HTML, you can see this display none and initial. So we have one HTML element over here, which is basically hidden. So let me just make full screen and try to see that element. So this is the element which is hidden. Okay, so here if I just disable this property, you can see that element is getting displayed again. Okay, when I enable, it will be hidden again. So let us go back to the code. The next that we are going to see is the flex, very important in terms of responsive designs. So what I have done here is created one tree structure for the flex container, and this is the container, and then we have few items and sub items here. Now with the normal mode, this will ideally just consume whole width and display everything one below the other, because div is a block type of HTML element. But when we apply flex as the display property, it can be displayed like this in column structures. So let us see what is the CSS that I have written for container, item and sub item. So in this CSS file we have container, item and sub item. So to the container I have specified border as red, 2 pixel solid, and then I have specified property display flex, and then I have specified flex direction as row, and width I have specified as 100. So whatever number of items that fall inside it will take equivalent amount of space. So if I try to resize this box, you can see that this column width is also changing. Okay, and in case you specify width as the fixed size, let's say 500 pixels, and I hit refresh, so you can notice that the size will be fixed now, it won't change. So to have responsive design, what you can do is you can have this width in variable width like 100% or 50% or something like that. So in the item class we have specified height as 50 pixels, and again we have display flex as the property set over here. Then I have specified flex as 1. I have just added few more properties just to simply make this a little beautiful. So I have specified 5 pixels and again the same border. Then I'm specifying justify content as center, so the text gets aligned into center. I've also specified align items as center over here. Similarly for the sub items we have everything same, there is no change actually. So what you can do is you can play around these values and see how the flex are rendered. Maybe you can try to add multiple items or multiple rows. So that is the only way you can get this idea very clearly. Similarly in the next example, what I have done is created one more element where we have this as the HTML. So you can notice that we have class name as container and content. So in case you want multiple classes to be applied, what you can do is you can apply the multiple classes along with spaces. So inside of class variable you can have multiple class names, and then we have our items. So if you notice that we have one item and then inside another item we have sub items, but because of the property that we are going to set over here, it is going to display the contents. Okay, so the outer element, that is this particular class, will not be displayed. However, the contents inside of this particular element, which are the selected ones, will be displayed. So this will not be displayed. So that is why we have this different look over here, that though these B and C are the child elements, those are displayed at the parent level. So this is because of the CSS that we have used, that is to the second element in the content line. So you can notice that we have written the nth child and it will be applied to the second child. So in the HTML, so this was the second child, that is why the CSS property display content is applied to this particular element only. Then finally we will talk about the display grid and inline grid. So this is the thing that it will just create the grids. So you can get the idea from the HTML itself that these all the elements are created with the CSS. Here we are not writing anything. So container no grid is the CSS which is specifying property here as background color and padding only. So we are not creating any grid over here. So that is a no grid. So the divs are going to behave in its default mode, that is it will be blocked and it is going to cover 100% of the available width. The next is display grid, where we are going to create the display grid. So same HTML, okay, everything is same, the class name is different. Class name is container grid. So if we just check container grid, so we have specified display as grid, and to the grid template columns we have specified auto. So here you can of course specify width in percentage. So when I say auto, so it is going to take the automatic width, that is, it is going to split itself automatically. Then we have specified a few other properties such as grid gap, and in case you're talking about the column, you can also add grid column gap as well and specify values. Then padding and background color is something that I have added additionally. So if you just resize this, you can notice that it is working quite responsive to the width of the page. It is quite adaptive to the width size. Then we will talk about the display inline grid. So in display inline grid, what I have done is specified property as display inline grid, and again the same thing with the grid template columns, but here additionally we have specified grid row gap and column gap as 20 pixels. So in the HTML, if you see that this is the only class that is applied to your div element, and this is the class here, and we have already discussed this particular item. Let us check what is inside the grid item class. So in grid item class, we have just specified background color, border, padding and text align center. So let us see how the width is getting applied. So let me make this into full screen and we will try to inspect this element. So if we notice here, the box is getting size of 187, and when I let's say remove this, so you can notice that the display inline grid is getting removed. And even when I remove this auto, you can see that the template columns is not getting applied. So I'll just enable it again. So now let us continue with other three examples. So we have display flex. So here what we have done is specified the flex child as the additional class. So let us see what is there exactly. So flex child is the property where we have specified value as flex1, and then I have also specified minimum width and minimum height, and then we have margin and background color applied to it. So because minimum height and width is applied, it is going to maintain at least that particular height or width. Okay, so if I just try to change it, you can see that the minimum 50% will be consistent. Similarly, we have display inline-flex, wherein you can see that these multiple flex are coming next to one another. You can add text also, which will just fall in line. Then we have display list item. So this can just create temporary list. You don't need to write OL or UL tag for this. So if you just notice the HTML here, we have these two div elements, and we have added the class as fake list, and to the fake list I have just specified property display list items, and it is just going to display these bullets. Also we have seen this property list style position inside and outside. So we have specified over here inside. Okay, so it will be part of the box. Then finally we will talk about the remaining code example. So this is what is something getting rendered. This is the HTML. We have an outer class, that is wrapper. This is applied to a div element. Then we have one header, then a class main for another div, and inside it we have three different divs. To first and third class I have specified two classes. One is box and the sidebar, and in the middle one we have box and content, and finally at the bottom we have one div element to which I am specifying class as footer. So let us see what exactly is in the CSS code. So this is the wrapper. We have just specified height as 300 pixel that will be applied. So this is 300 pixel, and then I'm specifying display as table. So all the traditional property which a table element has, that will be applied to this element. I have also specifying that the default alignment mode would be center. So that is why the text is getting aligned to the center. Then we have header element. So I am specifying display as table row. So again, whatever the property that gets applied to a table row, that will be applied over here. Then to the main class, we have display type as table, again the same thing. And to box, we have specified display as table cell. So all the properties that usually a table cell has will be adapted here. So we can see that all these three boxes are coming one after the other. These are coming in line. Just to the sidebar, we have specified width and background color. And to the footer, again I have specified display as table row and given the background color and normal color. So fairly easy to use. So what you can do is you can download these examples and play around with these values, so you get more clear idea about this. You can create your own examples and see how this is going to work. For now, let us continue with the next topic. So next we are going to check about visibility. So visibility determines whether the element is visible or not. So visibility property is used, and the values to visibility property are set as visible, hidden, collapse and inherit. So let us check one by one. So when we say visible, an element block or its contents are made visible. Okay, so in case the contents are hidden, those are made visible. Opposite to it is the hidden. So in case the contents are visible, you can specify the value as hidden, and the element block and its contents are made invisible. But even with the hidden, it will still have effect on the layout of the page. Meaning, if you have, let's say, 3 elements like this, okay, and if you made this element as invisible or hidden, then in that case the layout will be still retained, and content will be displayed like this. Okay, so there could be some instances wherein you may require this kind of behavior. So in case you don't want change to layout, you can use visibility equal to hidden. You can write these values like this: visibility colon visible and visibility colon hidden. Next we have collapse. With the collapse value, the entire row or the column can be removed from the display, and it is used for row groups, column and column group elements. And then we have inherit. We know that when it is used, it just inherits property from the parent or the property value set for the parent. So for example, if in case your parent has the value set as collapse, then it will be inherited as it is. Then we have position. So using position, you can define how an element will be positioned on the page. So there are different types of positioning. One is static. So in static, the elements are positioned according to the normal flow of the page. So static is the default position of all the elements, and elements which are static in position are not affected by the top, bottom, left, right and z index properties. So these properties we are going to check in the upcoming slides, but this is something that we should know. So we know that all the elements are static in the default positions. So technically, without writing even this property, you will have the similar effect. So what we have in the example is one container, and we have specified padding and margin to this container as 50-50 pixels. Position of this particular box is relative, and inside this we have another box, which is this particular box, and by default it is static, so we are not specified anything, so it remains static inside the container. Then next what we have is the relative positioning, and when this property is set, the position becomes relative to its own normal position, and elements are shifted using this particular property value by its normal position using other properties top, bottom, left and right. Okay, so to illustrate this with an example, we have the same container box, okay, from the previous example, and the box that we had, we are just adding position relative to it. Okay, so with this what happens is that position of this existing box, which was previously here, okay, will be shifted by 50 pixels on the left hand side. Okay, so from this position it is shifted to 50 pixels like this. Okay, you can also specify top, bottom, left and right. All these four properties can be used along with position property. Then next we have absolute positioning, which is commonly used, and when we use absolute as the position value, so the element to which this value is applied, it is positioned relative to first parent element that has position other than the static, and it is used when you have a requirement wherein a certain element need to be overlapped with other variables, and it better works with the z-index property. We will see the z-index property in upcoming slides. So to understand this, so let's say you have certain element, okay, and this element is relative, and inside this if you have one child, okay, and to this child if you set value as position absolute, okay, assuming this particular parent has position as relative, okay, so this element will have its position absolute but relative to this first particular element. So in the previous example, okay, what is going to happen when I specify a position equal to absolute to the red box, it is going to position itself inside of this container. Okay, so we notice that this position is relative for this particular container, okay, and it has margin and padding as 50px, okay, but there was some other content, so it has got overlapped now. So if you just notice this previous example wherein this text was coming below the box, okay, now what has happened that it has created a kind of a layer that this particular box is coming above the other HTML elements. So basically what has happened that this particular element has got shifted above, and above that element this box has started displaying now. So absolute positioning is quite useful when you are going to work on multiple layers or when you want to build multiple layers on the web page. So this is something that we are going to recheck again with the help of z-index property. For now, let us continue with the next value related to the position property. So the next one is the fixed positioning. It is a subcategory of absolute positioning. Only difference is that it does not move along with the scroll. So the main difference is when you specify fixed positioning, so element will not scroll. So wherever the position that we have specified, it will be relative to the viewport. Okay, so when you say, let's say one element you are going to add over here and you specify its position as fixed, and you specify that top and left is equal to, let's say, 50-50. So even when you scroll this page, okay, this position will not change for this element, it will remain static. So this element will be fixed to this location, okay, even if you're going to scroll the page, okay. But in case of absolute, this element will move along with the scroll. Okay, so that is one major difference between position absolute and fixed. So you may have noticed some important tickers on certain pages that even if you scroll the pages, certain elements don't change their place. Maybe on somewhere on the right hand side bottom you have a certain button over here, okay, and this particular button or this particular scroll card or something like that won't change its place. So that is achieved using the position fixed. Okay, so this is the example that we have seen, and what we have done is just specified value as fixed over here. Everything else remains the same, but when I'm going to scroll this page either up or down, this element is not going to change its place. So that was all for positioning your HTML elements. Now let us continue with layers. So z-index is the property that is used to create different layers on your web page, but it is used along with the position property, and elements can be stacked along z-axis, okay, on one another. Okay, so basically what happens is, let's say you have this element, okay, and then one more element can get added over your previous element, and you can create multiple layers like this. Okay, and all layers can have certain different content inside those, okay, like this. And if you have same dimensions for all these layers on your web page, it will look like a single layer. So this is quite useful when you have multiple level information that needs to be displayed. So to the z-index, you specify integer values, and that represents a stack number, or the order of that stack. So generally the larger z-index value overlaps the lower one. So in this particular case, you could have z-index of the lowest layer as, let's say, -100, then 0 and 100. So the interval is not really important over here. Maybe you can write 0, 1, 2, 3, or -100, 0 and 100. But generally what developers do, they usually keep some distance between these layer numbers. The reason is in maybe future, in case you are required to add additional layer between these two, so you can just add layer number, let's say 50. So it's always good idea to have certain intervals between your two or more layers, but it shouldn't be huge. Technically it might increase size of your code, so maybe increments of 5 then 10 are sufficient, or even intervals of 2 or 3 can be helpful in some cases. So ideally you can increase the numbers by 2 or 3. So maybe your lowest index number could start from layer 0, then maybe you can have another layer with, let's say, 3, 6 and so on. But again, this is something that depends on the requirement, or the level of development, or the complexity of the development, or the complexity of the problem that you're trying to solve. So let us take one example for this. This is the similar example that we have seen earlier. We have this container body and this other box that we have inside this container, and you notice that to this box I have specified position as absolute, okay, and then we have one p tag, okay, which was the text that was getting displayed on the previous examples. To that layer I am specifying z-index as 2, okay. So if you notice in the previous example, what was happening, the text was behind the box, okay. So with this particular example, what we are doing is we are bringing that text up, okay. So that element now is being displayed above the box which was having position as absolute, okay. Also notice that even this box has position set as absolute. So usually these two work along each other, and it helps us creating this particular effect. So finally we'll talk about the float property, which is also important when we have to position our elements properly. So float property specifies whether the element should float or not, and it applies to box level elements only. And it makes sense to use this particular property where the elements are not absolutely positioned, and values for the float property are left, right and none. And you can write it like this. We can just specify float and specify right. So this is one example where we have this particular element, okay, and when I have one image, and when I specify float colon right, then this image is getting floated on the right hand side, okay. So fairly simple to use. And then finally we have alignments. So the text inside of block levels, sometimes you will require to get it aligned either on left side, right side, or you want to keep it in the center. So in those cases you can make use of alignment property, and possible values for the alignment property are left, so it aligns your text to left hand side. Then you have right, which basically aligns your text to right hand side. Then you have center, which aligns your text to the center. And you can specify initial, which sets the value to the default, and you know that inherit it will take values from the parent element. Okay, then you have two more. One is start and end, wherein you can align the element to the start of the element, and with the help of end as the value you can align to the end of the element. So let us see how you can write. So this is how you can write. You can specify text align right, text align center. Yeah, so this particular h1 tag we have written text align right, so you can see that it has shifted towards right. And because this p tag has specified text align as center, you can notice that this particular block is centrally aligned. Okay, though the p tag could be occupying the complete space over here, okay, but within that block level element, which is p tag in this case, the text is aligned in the center. So that was all for alignment, float, positioning and visibility. So let us understand this by examples in the coding session. So let us take few examples on visibility, position, layers, float and align properties that we have seen so far. So what we have done is we have created one HTML and CSS file. In the example, we are also going to use one logo image from the kodegod. It is this image. So you can find this file in the folder visibility, position, layers, float, align. But to revise or to see what properties that we have seen so far, let me just quickly create one file and save this file at the same location. So let me just create one more file. Let me save this file inside the same folder, and I'm going to call this file as sample.html. okay, and let me just open this file. So here is the blank file, and let me just start writing few HTML lines. So I'm writing the title as sample, and then let me create one div element, and inside this div, let's say I'm writing style sheet code. Let's say border 1 pixel solid #333 is the background color, and when I hit refresh, you can see the div is there, it is displayed there, but there's nothing inside this. So let me just try adding kodegod here, and when I hit refresh, you can see the text is getting displayed over there. So let me just add more properties to it. Let's say height equal to 100 pixels, then width equal to 100 pixels. Okay, and then let me add one separate div inside this, and let me just add same properties inside that div. So let us see what happens. And I'm writing the kodegod here as well, copying and pasting here as well. Okay, so when I hit refresh, you can see that the divs are created like this. If I remove the height and width for both the divs, okay, you can see that these are normal structures. Okay, so I'll just undo this. Okay, now these are the nested divs. Okay, so one div is coming after the other, but because there is no more content to it, it will just display in the order. Let us try to take this out and paste here, I hit the refresh, you can see that it is coming now one below the other. Let me just reverse this code. Okay, so we are at this state. So now let us play with the position absolute and relative. So what is going to happen, the default state for both the elements is relative. Okay, so now let us make this as position absolute. Okay, when I hit refresh there is no change, but when I add a property as, let's say, top colon 100 pixel and let's say left colon 200 pixels, okay, and when I hit refresh you can see its location has got changed. So it is 100 pixel from the top and 200 pixel from the left. Now the div which is inside of the parent div, it has the default position as relative. So let me just try to add a relative and it will have no change over there. But when I, let's say, remove this and add some other properties, let's say top equal to, let's say, 50 pixels and left colon 100 pixels. So when I hit refresh, still there is no change. The reason is the position is still relative to the parent element. But when I add position as absolute, okay, and when I hit refresh, you can see that now there is some additional difference. It has created 200 pixels from this point and 50 pixels from the top. So let me just make the left as 50 pixels, okay, and when I hit refresh you can see that 50 pixels from top and left are done for the child div. Now let us try to add a background color to this particular div. Let's say I'm adding 444 and I'm just going to copy and paste for the second div. Let's say I'm replacing the 444 with 777, and when I hit refresh you can see that two different colors are applied to these two divs. So in a way we have created these different layers. Now let us try to change z index of these properties. So let me say z index, let's say 0, and then add z index for the second element as 1 over here, and when I hit refresh there is no change. But let's say I change this one to 2, still there is no change. The reason is we are trying to create the layers for parent and div. So let me just try to take this div out, okay, like this, and when I hit the refresh, of course the position is now different, reason being top and left are different. So let me try to bring the first one closer to the second one. So let me reduce the top to, let's say, 25 and left to 25. Okay, so if you notice here, the first element which is in the darker black color, okay, though it is appearing first in the document object model or in your body tag, it is not overlapped with the second div. Okay, so let me just try to remove the z index property so you can understand. So I have removed it, and when I hit refresh you can see the second div is coming on the top. The reason is it is coming farthest or the end of your document object model. So to change this order, what I'm doing is I am adding the z index. So z index for this second div is lower and it is higher for the first div. That is the reason we are able to change the layer of these divs using z index. Let me just quickly explain the concept of fixed as the position. So let us say I have this div and I'm, let's say, adding the text again, and I'm quickly writing few code lines over here. Let's say border 1 pixel solid hash 555 comma position equal to fixed, then bottom, let's say 90%, and right I'm saying, let's say 20%. Okay, when I hit refresh, you can see this image is here. Okay, I'm saying bottom as 90%. Let me just update it to 10%, so it will come at the bottom like this. Now position of this particular div element would be fixed. Okay, so let me just try to resize the browser. You can see that it is not changing its location. Also it is relative to the top and bottom. Okay, so this is the fixed element, and in case I add, let's say, a couple of lorem ipsum text. Okay, so let's say I'm adding lorem ipsum. Let me just copy paste this couple of times, so a scroll bar gets added on the page. Okay, so it has got added. Okay, so you can notice this kodegod div is fixed on that location. So let me just add background color to it, so you can clearly see it. Color, say hash 333. So when I hit refresh, you can see that the div is fixed at a particular location. So these are few important properties that you've seen. Now let us continue with the example that we have created. So let me close this window, and this is the output that is rendered with the help of this particular example. Alright, so as we have seen this concept in detail, so let us quickly scroll through this example. So what we have done is we have created these basic properties over here, that is for hidden visibility and visible modes. So then we have few container related CSS which are part of these examples. So that is still this point. Then to image tag, we have one special property, that is the float right, and then we are just specifying standard text alignments over here with center, left, right, and justify. And this is the standard HTML code, which basically has just the sample divs element, and somewhere I have one image as well. So this is the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open this page in full screen mode, and I'm just going to inspect each element and just quickly explain what exactly the behavior is there. So first of all, you can notice this particular div, it is scrolling around the web page. It is because it has the position set as fixed. So you can notice here that it has the position as fixed. So let me just uncheck this. Okay, and it has become the normal text box. It is not the fixed text box now. So because I have disabled the, so this has become position relative, so that is why it has displayed like this. So let me just quickly explain this part over here. So you can see that there is this div, and inside this div I have two spans, one is visible and hidden. So you can notice that there is a hidden span. You can see the highlight on the left hand side. So if I just select and remove this property, you can see it is getting displayed over there. Okay, so this is how the visibility mode, but the problem with, or the feature of visibility mode is that it will still consume the space for required for that element even if it is hidden. Then we will talk about the static position box. Okay, so let me just select this. Okay, so what we have done over here is inside the container we have this box, and to this static box we have set the property as position relative. So we don't have to explicitly set this property, but by default it will be position relative. We have just added left and padding for this particular box. So you can see that it has created this 50 pixel as the padding. So let me just select that box. So you can see that there is a 20 pixel padding. Okay, and if I select this outer box, you can see the 50 pixels padding that this particular outer box has. It also has 50 pixels margin, and then this box is automatically rendered as the relative. And then for the next example, the container is same. However, this red box, okay, let us check style for that. So I have the class name as relative box, and here we have specified left as 50, position as relative. So this left is getting added relatively to the parent's position. Okay, so it is shifting by 50 pixels from its parent. Then continuing ahead, in the next example, we can see that we again have position as a relative, and this is for its container, and then inside we have one absolute box. So when we specify absolute, it is going to set itself absolute from the parent's relative position. So let me just try to change these values. You can see that it will start moving like this. Okay, and if I add, let's say, top, let's say 200 pixels, you can see it has shifted down, and let's say make it 10 pixel. Okay, it is come just there, and when I make it 0, you can see that it is almost touching the parent. Now interesting part about absolute is you can go further, you can say values as minus as well. Okay, so you can see that it is going above the top line of your parent. Okay, so let me just cancel this part and just reset this to 50. Okay, now for layers, what we can do is create few multiple elements. So this is the absolute box, is a similar that one we used, and then we have this particular component. This is a p tag inside of your absolute box. Now to the second p, what I have done is I have specified position as absolute, and that is why it will overlap with the div tag, and then I have specified z index as 2 to this element. So that is why you can see this particular element displayed at the top, otherwise it was at the back like this. Now we'll quickly talk about the alignments. So we have seen that alignments are of 4 type. So this text align is center, so it has got your text shifted to center. Then this is the text align left, which is the default mode. This is text align right, and this is text align justify. Also for the image, you can see that this image is floating on the right hand side. This is because of this particular property, float right. So if I just remove, you can see that it is trying to fall in line with the text. Okay, when I enable it, it is coming on the right hand side. So what you can do is, again, you can play around this code, try changing few values, and try to understand concept of all the properties that we have seen. So these all concepts are quite useful when we especially work on multiple objects which require to fall on one another, and you want to create multi-layer kind of a structure.